Well, we're joined by a fantastic panel. Peter Schiff, the president of Euro-Pacific Capital. Lakshman Achutan is the managing editor of the Economic Cycle Research Institute. And Jim Ellis is the assistant managing editor of Business Week. Thanks to all of you for being here. I want to start with you, Peter. You have been writing about and describing a coming crash and recession for some years now. I hate to say that some of the things that you've written about, as outlandish as they seem, do seem to be bearing out right now.
Sure. You know, the problem, too, a lot of the jobs that are now being destroyed in our economy never should have been created in the first place. They were a function of our bubble economy, of the fact that Americans were borrowing money and spending too much. And as they can no longer spend because we're broke, all these phony service sector jobs are going to have to disappear. And as painful as it is for the people who are in those jobs, the government has to stand aside and let it happen. We can't try to keep people in non-viable jobs. We need to go back to making things, and it's going to be a very painful process. And Americans are going to have to rein in their spending and start saving money.
I just want to ask you one thing, and I know this is theory that you've worked on, but we're now talking about officially close to 2 million jobs lost this year alone, and it could be substantially more. I've heard you say it will need millions of job losses to set this economy straight. What is the real equation there for people? What does your science and your academia tell you that real people are supposed to do? 5 million people are unemployed.
Look, it's not my science. It's just how markets work. It's capitalism.
Yeah, but don't we have an obligation as a nation, as a modern economy, to make sure that 5 million people aren't living in tents?
There's nothing that we can do. You know, the government can't create jobs. They're going to destroy jobs trying to do it. The government doesn't have any money. All they have is a printing press. We need the free market to create jobs. If the government wants to help, they should reduce their burden on the economy. We should be cutting government spending. We should be cutting taxes. We actually should be raising interest rates. We're doing all of the wrong things.
Listen,
we're going to destroy this economy.
Nobody is talking about doing any of those things. You're right. I mean, and nobody's. And so what they're talking about doing is spending a whole lot of money in fiscal stimulus, and we've got the Federal Reserve doing everything that it possibly can to keep the economy afloat.
But they're not going to keep it going. Remember, we're in trouble because we borrowed and spent too much money. We're not going to borrow and spend our way out of it. We have to do the opposite of what we've been doing. We are simply digging ourselves into a deeper hole right now. All that's increased is the paper values of our stocks and real estate. But that's not real wealth, no more than the NASDAQ was wealth. When you see the stock market come down and the real estate bubble burst, all that phony wealth is going to evaporate. And all that's going to be left is all the debt that we accumulated to foreigners.
Peter, I'm going to take a bet with you on this one. I'll bet you a penny on this one that if you'll sign a letter saying that if you're wrong, you'll sign a letter that you were wrong to me in this, but you're just way off base. There is nothing out there that tells us we're going to have a nice slowdown, but it's not going to be a crash.
Let me ask you this.
You've just been watching a clip that's making the rounds on YouTube featuring my guest today, Peter Schiff. He's president of Euro-Pacific Capital. Back in 2006, having a friendly debate with Art Laffer, the famous Reagan economist. So did he ever pay you that penny? Did you get the note saying I was wrong and you were right?
Never got the penny, never got the note. In fact, on Bill Maher, he was asked about that, and he basically claimed that he doesn't think he lost because the statute of limitations on economic forecasts is 9 months.
Wow. Well, 2+ years ago, if not longer, you were out there, one of the few voices out there saying the U.S. economy is headed over a cliff. First of all, do you feel vindicated at this point?
Well, I don't know if I'm completely vindicated yet because 100% of my forecasts haven't panned out. There's still a few major predictions that I've made that haven't come true yet, but I believe that they will.
So which ones? What are those major forecasts that are still out there?
Well, I had predicted a major decline in the dollar, which was underway up until recently, and we've had a rally in the dollar. I think this rally will be short-lived, and I still believe the dollar will collapse, particularly as a result of all the policies that we're pursuing now, the stimulus and the bailouts. I also predicted that commodity prices would rise, including gold. That had happened up until recently, but again, I assume that this is a short-term correction in that ongoing bull market, and I expect new highs in commodity prices over the next few years.
All right, so we're going to look at some of the other clips from this video on YouTube called Peter Schiff Was Right, which you didn't put up, but there's a lot of instances here where you were right and the other guys were wrong. Yeah. Let's have a listen.
Most of the profits that people have in real estate are going to vanish, just like the profits in the dot-coms in 1999, 2000. It's a fantasy. People can't sell their house. The inventories are exploding all over the country. Houses are on the market for 6 months a year. There's no bidders. The prices are going to fall through the floor. You guys are deluding yourselves.
But subprime is tiny. Subprime is a tiny, tiny blip.
It's not tiny, and again, it's not just subprime. It's the entire mortgage market. Right?
All right. Well, Tracy, you're disagreeing with. Well, you're simply wrong about that.
No, I'm not.
So we just heard Ben Stein, you have any thoughts? He did apologize to you.
Yeah, you know, in fairness to Ben, he wrote a piece in the New York Times in which he apologized and admitted that I was right on that and he was wrong and that he wished he had listened to me. So that I appreciated that.
Not to dwell too much on history, but what did you see that other people didn't see?
Well, I just think I understood the economics better. I mean, people were looking at consumption and thinking that was legitimate economic growth. They looked at our GDP that was rising, but it was simply because Americans were using their credit cards and taking out home equity loans and spending the money. And while everybody was looking at our asset values, they looked at home prices and real estate prices and said, well, we can handle the debt because we're really getting wealthier.
That's what Arlaffer talked about in that first clip, right?
I knew that that was phony. I knew that eventually we were going to have to pay the interest on this debt, and I knew a lot of Americans were using adjustable rate mortgages. I know the government is financing all the debt with Treasury bills. I know eventually interest rates would rise, and that these interest payments would be an increasing burden on the economy, and eventually when those asset bubbles burst, we'd just be broke.
Okay, so where, in your estimation, are we in the cycle? Because obviously, you know, coming into Friday, the S&P at its lowest level since 1997.
Yeah.
Financial Armageddon. Citigroup trading under $5 a share.
Yeah, I mean, the financial crisis is well underway. I mean, I don't know how much left there is. I think there's still a lot more damage to come. But I think the economic crisis is only just beginning. And there's a lot more pain. And the problem is, what's happening right now in the economy, this is not the problem. This is the consequence. The problem was those years of reckless spending that Art Laffer thought was so great. That's when we were digging ourselves into this hole. We were borrowing trillions of dollars from the world. We blew all the money on consumption, and now we can't pay the bills. Meanwhile, we allowed the manufacturing sector of our economy to disintegrate while we pretended we had a viable service sector to replace it. So we have to have a very painful transition. We're going to have a much lower standard of living for many, many years as we have to deal with the consequences of our reckless behavior. And I think the instigator of all that was the government itself. It was the reckless monetary policies of the Federal Reserve, principally Alan Greenspan, but now he's handed that baton to Bernanke, and also a government that constantly interfered in the free market, produced moral hazards, rewarded reckless speculation, and punished thrift and savings.
Right, so I'm not going to laugh at you because you're talking about very serious stuff, and you've been right up until this point, but what is the risk to your scenario, the things that maybe, you know, where you're proven wrong, where things could go better than you would expect?
I don't think there's a risk of things getting better. I don't think we have to worry about that. I mean, the only thing that could happen that would delay this would be if the rest of the world, the Chinese and the Japanese and the Saudis, decide that they're going to lend us the trillions of dollars that we need to borrow to try to paper this thing over. And if they do that, then we're simply going to postpone the collapse to a later date, but it'll be much worse.
All right, Peter, thanks very much.
Thanks.
History happened yesterday. The Fed announced that it is going to pump $1 trillion into the system by buying debt from our Treasury. What does that mean? You know, I asked my producers today, I said, why is nobody covering this? And they said, Glenn, it's too complex. Nobody really understands this. It's hard to explain. Please, America, please stay with me on this. They have lowered interest rates as far as they can. What happened yesterday is a last-ditch effort. You know, it's like they put our entire economy up on the roulette wheel and said, yeah, you know what? Let's let her roll. Keep it on black, 17. To put this into perspective, think of America this way. She's like a sick patient, and she's got one of those nasty staph infections, you know, and the doctor's like, oh, we'll just give her a little penicillin and everything will clear up. And then they try something else, and pretty soon you're in the hospital. And that's when you open up your eyes and you see everybody, you're now in an isolation room there in the hospital, and they've all got masks, and they're hanging a little bag of IV, and they're like, oh, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. Oh, dear God, he's going to die. They usually, you know, the last line of defense for antibiotics is Vanco. That's it. If it doesn't work, you're dead. Yesterday, about 3 o'clock Eastern, the last line of defense was hung over the patient called America. But we were all, including me, too focused on that AIG thing. Oh, that scandal. Here's what all of this means. What they did yesterday afternoon is they started borrowing money from ourselves to pay ourselves for programs we can't afford. You know, it's like I said, you know what, Glenn, I just would like $1,000 for M&Ms. Well, Glenn, I don't think you should be spending that $1,000. But I really want some M&Ms, Glenn. Okay, I tell you what. I've got the money right here. Well, it's not actually money. What it is, it's an I owe me. So, Glenn, I'll give it to you. Oh, my goodness, Glenn, thank you so much. I'm good for it. Really, I am. They're moving money from one pocket to another. It doesn't work. I'll show you why the situation is deathly serious in just a minute, but first I want to show you something over here. I asked the art department, and they are so good. I asked them to show how much is $1 trillion, because that's what we printed yesterday. $1 trillion. I think we have lost sight on how much $1 trillion is. So here's $100. We all know $100. There it is, $100 bill. Next, $10,000. What does that look like stacked up in $100 bills? There it is. Now $1 million stacked up in $100 bills. It would fit in a big suitcase.